Welcome, everybody. I'm Jill Jonathan with Red, Wine, and Blue. We're a community of women who use digital media and friend to friend organizing to change the world one suburb at a time. And I just have to say something about friend to friend organizing. We heard a lot about that at the DNC last week because it works. Okay. So just letting everybody know. So I'm so excited to be here with my co-host Joe Carducci, as in JoJo from Jers. We love talking to interesting people making a difference in the world. And today we have Jemar Tisby. So welcome. We are so excited to have you. And as you can see on his background, he has a new book coming out. So that will be the focus, The Spirit of Justice. So I just like getting right into it. So Jamar, just let us know about, my question is this book is very timely. And can you tell us why and why the timing of this book is so significant?
Hey Jill, hey Jojo, thank you for having me on. And actually, I would love to know why you think it's timely. I wonder, as an author, if the message came through. The reason I think it's timely is because even though right now we have this like momentum, people are feeling a little bit more optimistic politically since the Harris Walls campaign took off. At the same time, it's really tenuous. And I think what this political season has shown us is there's nothing that's guaranteed or that's inevitable to happen. And that goes both ways, good and bad, right? And I really want this book to help people stay in it for the long haul because there are many times in our history when it was two steps forward, one step back, when we're seeing the gains that we thought were secure not be so stable. And the question is, how do you keep going when it looks like you're not winning? And that's where the spirit of justice comes in.
Yeah, I like how you say that you wrote the book because you need people to be reminded that they are not alone in their struggle against racism. And I think that reminder sort of speaks to what you just said there, that it is perpetual, right? So it's not just we fixed it. We cured racism. It's over.
That's right. That's right. I think after 2020, there were a lot of people who were catalyzed. They saw the video of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. They marched. They got involved. They did black squares on social media, right? And they were like, "It's been 2 months. Why hasn't everything changed?" And it's like, "Oh no, baby, you just getting into this. We are part of a centuries long struggle." I was just at a speaking event and we were talking about MLK's phrase, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And talking about the fact that we have to bend it. That's that person to person organizing. And also, the default setting in a lot of cases is toward injustice. So that if we stop bending it, guess what? It's not going to stay where it was. It's going to revert back to an unjust state, which isn't it interesting that there are politicians now who want us to go backward to a particular time in history. And usually, when you go backward in history, it's not good for historically marginalized groups like Black people and women and so many others. So we have to bend that arc of the moral universe. And I think by studying history, we can actually gain hope, inspiration, imagination to continue doing so.
Yeah, speaking of 2020, and then I want to go back just 4 years before that, 2016, because
Mm.
that's, where my personal story kind of starts. Because, like, a lot of people like me were shocked that Trump won, presidency. And my big question was, what did I miss? I don't understand where this come from. But then as I started like doing research and trying to understand what happened, there are people who are like, no, we're not surprised by this at all. So I just have a question for you. Were you surprised in 2016, or were you like, I kind of saw this happening? I'm curious what your thoughts were.
So I wonder what the words are. Surprised? No, no, but still there's this shock, right?
Mhm.
It's still a shock to the system. Um, it 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 was so 2016 was a big catalyst for me as well, 2015, 2016. And I think a big part of the story and what felt so surprising to many was not quite connecting the dots between religion and politics. particularly white Christian nationalism and politics. So I talked in my previous book, The Color of Compromise, about the rise of the religious right, going all the way back to the late 1970s, right? And so this is a 4-decade endeavor to link white Christianity, white evangelical Christianity with the Republican Party. And I think it was telling that 81% of evangelicals who voted pulled the lever for Trump. So, fast forwarding to the present day, if we want to understand the political landscape, then we also have to understand the religious landscape and the ways that plays into the way people are thinking about voting.
Something that will be of no surprise to you, right? Something you know very well is that there is a concerted effort on the part of the right now to whitewash, suppress, essentially erase Black history from society at large, but certainly from our system of public schools, even colleges. In your book, you emphasize the importance of this history and those brave voices who helped to shape it. So it is that reminder as well, but it's also, like your cover, for instance, how did those 3 individuals shape the history that the right is currently trying to keep from the American people?
Ooh, don't get me started talking about history now. Look, oh my gosh, history has the receipts. Like,
Mm.
you want to know how we got to this present moment, everything has a history. So you talked about the people on the cover. One is Anna Murray Douglas, who was Frederick Douglass's wife. There would be no Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, the autobiographer as we know him, without Anna Murray, because she helped him escape to freedom. In the center on the book cover is Coretta Scott King. She's got this wonderful line in her autobiography that says, there was a Coretta and there was a Mrs. King, and somehow the Coretta got lost in the conversation. And she says, how that happened, I will never know. But she's asserting herself as her own independent woman and being. And I have a whole chapter on Black women of the civil rights movement because they were in the shadow of the Black men and this patriarchy and the sexism that was happening even in the Black church. So history is really helpful, and in specific, as we look at Black people of faith, Black religious people, and how they engaged in politics. So one of the things I'm trying to do in the spirit of justice is say, hey, yeah, there's this thing called white Christian nationalism. And in fact, it's not new. It's got iterations throughout US history, right? But what's the alternative? Well, in many ways, get ready for this fancy phrase, the Black church is the ecclesiastical rebuttal to white Christian nationalism. In other words, the Black church arose because of racism or white Christian nationalism in the white church. And so theologically, ecclesiastically, sermonically, all of those things, it's pushing back against racism. It's pushing back against white supremacy. And guess what? It also pushes back against a politics of authoritarianism that narrows down who really counts in democracy and who is a so-called true American. You want to learn more about that, you learn about the Black Christian tradition and their approach to politics.
And I mean, what you're saying then, that can become very dangerous to people who are trying to push that white Christian nationalism. And that has to be a reason why they're trying to erase that
You
from
got
public
it.
education.
Listen, history is dangerous because we start to learn our own power.
Right.
These are folks who resisted in the face of much more daunting circumstances than even we face now. These are people who are facing slavery, the Civil War, Jim Crow segregation, lynching, the suppression of voting, all of that stuff. And yet they were able to push back. That's what was remarkable to me. Unfortunately, people behaving badly is pretty commonplace. You can find that all over and all the time. What is so remarkable to me are that there are always people who push back, and they tap into something that I call the spirit of justice to do that. I'll give you one quick example. I frame the book around Myrlie Evers Williams. You will remember her as the widow of Medgar Evers, who was the field secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi. He was assassinated in front of their own homes. Myrlie Evers, who walks out of their doorstep and finds him bleeding there, calls the ambulance, is there when he passes away. And at the grand opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, December 9th, 2017, she speaks there. Now, mind you, the context. She has just walked through the museum where they have on display the actual rifle that was used to kill her husband, right? So she's coming out of that. Then she holds this press conference afterwards. And we're talking about the spirit of justice. We're talking about how do people continually rise up in the face of bad acts and bad actors. And she says, somebody asked her, well, how does now compare to then? How does this political social movement compare to the civil rights movement? She said, you know, there's a lot happening now that I hoped I'd never see again.
Oh,
And she says it's pretty similar. But then she says this. She says, I'm weary, but there's something about the spirit of justice that raises up like a war horse and makes you determined all over again. Let that rest in your spirit and consider she was 84 years old when she said this. I fully expected her to be like, I'm weary. It's up to y'all. I'm passing it to the next generation.
Yeah.
She didn't do that. She said that she's become determined all over again, and that's because of the spirit of justice. That's what I want to stoke in us. That's what we need right now. We don't know what's going to happen in November. There's some momentum, there's organizing. We're going to push as hard as we can, but we don't know. And even after that, that's another thing that's different right now.
Mhm.
That's not going to settle the question.
mm-mm.
No matter who wins in November, half the country is going to be upset. And there's one half of the country that is statistically more prone to saying that violence may be necessary to bring about desired political ends. So
Right.
what are we going to do, y'all? We got to have some resilience. And that's where I think history can help. I'm sorry. You got me. I told you don't get me talking about history.
No,
Oh,
no, that's the
oh,
whole point here.
yeah. I mean, that quote
Uh,
is so powerful, right? But because what we've seen throughout history is that every time that an advancement, right? Every time you get a little bit of momentum, every time things are going really well, then the pushback, the commensurate
you
pushback
better
it
talk that
meets,
talk.
right? And we're there
Yes.
right now. We are there right
Yes.
now,
Mhm.
and you can see that, and it doesn't end in November, like you said. It in November will be very much a fulcrum moment for what is coming ahead. But calling upon those who have paved this path before and their words and how they were able to stay so resilient in the face of the horrors that they had to experience in order to keep rising, right? It is so resonant, like to Jill's point early at the top of this, why this really applies so much to today. And I mean, we're certainly going to see we are seeing and are going to see even more pushback in this regard.
You get it. You get it. I'm a professor. I'm a college professor. A+ on your essay. A+. You got it.
Better than I ever did in college. Thank you.
It paid off.
And, something that I appreciate so much about your book, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, is the women behind the movement. So,
Yeah.
Coretta Scott King, I am just like, she is a shero of mine. And I
Mm,
really didn't know much about her until I was at an event with the King Center and they had her
mm.
book there and I bought it. And I'm just like, oh, I had no idea what a big role that she played in that. So, can you, we're suburban women here. Can you tell us a little bit about, the importance that women have played in the movement and in the history of the movement?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's one of the most critical parts of this book, The Spirit of Justice. I worked really hard to make sure there was gender parity in each chapter, but then I devoted a whole chapter on Black women of the Civil Rights Movement. I've got an article coming out in the Louisville Courier Journal tomorrow, which is the anniversary of the March on Washington, and how there was this terrible recalcitrance on the part of the Black male leaders not to include women in the formal speaking program. And they gave some slight concessions, but nowhere near commensurate to the contribution of women just to that one event. And so we really have to do much more justice to women, not just as part of the masses and the marchers, but also as the masterminds of the movement. And these were tacticians, these were strategists coming up with so much of it. So Coretta Scott King, for example, number one, she's brilliant. She graduates valedictorian of her class. She gets a scholarship to go to the New England Conservatory for singing, just mind-blowingly musically talented, right? And she's also ahead of MLK on learning about nonviolence and pacifism. And she was already an activist before they met. So it's not like she wasn't in this world already. She, as a matter of fact, was not that keen on this short, very kind of overconfident, dapper dresser, ladies' man kind of guy. She was like, I don't know about him. But
Mm,
they did connect over justice and understand that her choices led directly to some of the contributions that MLK makes, right? So her deliberate sacrifice, in a way, sacrifice of her professional ambitions to be a pastor's wife and a stay-at-home mom, to give him the freedom to do some other stuff. But she never gives up her passions wholesale at all. And as a matter of fact, she's a forward thinker because she kept his papers, she kept his speeches, she's kept memorabilia. And within weeks after his assassination, starts the King Center, which still goes today as a repository of her husband's work, but also as a continuation of her global human rights activism. She's standing against apartheid and nuclear war and all of these things. So I can go on and on. Point being, we cannot properly understand the civil rights movement, let alone the Black freedom struggle in general, if we don't understand the contribution of women, particularly Black women, who were so often deliberately excluded both by the historical actors themselves and by the popular memory in our society.
Can we speak a little bit? Just it's not necessarily in the book, but it is very much tangential to the book. Can you speak a little bit about how we've reached this moment, or the impact and the power of this moment, that we have a Black Indian woman at the top of a major, party's ticket for president? And I was coming off of the DNC and watching that and feeling that and experiencing that and just seeing Kamala up there. I just wanted to see, what your thoughts are on this historic moment.
Ooh, um, historic is the right word. It's so interesting being a historian and living through so much history, right? That, I mean, we can truly say that events in the past several years, both good and bad, have never happened before. So we can accurately call them history even while it's happening. Kamala Harris being the Democratic nominee for president is one of them. I wrote an article on my Substack about Shirley Chisholm paving the way. Even ethnically and nationally, she's Barbadian, right? Barbadian American, and she puts in a bid to be the Democratic nominee for president. Ultimately unsuccessful, but has the boldness and the vision and the courage to go after something like that, which opens up the way for Kamala Harris, who's a little girl when this happens, to be able to dream and envision a reality where she could be president and that actually be within the realm of possibility. I also think about other women who don't have as much acclaim or notoriety. Myrlie Evers Williams herself ran for political office in California, where she left after the assassination of her husband. Fannie Lou Hamer, who spoke at the Democratic National Convention in 1964, she ran for political office several times in Mississippi and was unsuccessful. I write about Unita Blackwell, who was the first Black woman mayor in Mississippi of a tiny town called Mayorsville. And so all of these women, all of these people helped pave the way under incredibly um, monumental forces of opposition against them. But because they did that, they also planted a seed for people like Kamala Harris to be where she is now. So that's actually a word I think of encouragement for folks is that you're planting seeds that may bear fruit generations later, right?
Mm.
So these women, many of them were unsuccessful in their electoral bids, but what they were able to do is open up pathways of imagination and possibility for folks who came after them.
Mm.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And it just people who open those pathways and might not get to see the fruits of their labor while they're on this earth, but they do it anyway. And I think that's kind of
Mm.
what you're talking about. Like that spirit of justice, like you have that, it doesn't go away. It kind of makes me think how a lot of women, in our community who are kind of waking up to what's happening and getting our heads out of the sand. And we've said before, like once your head is out of the sand, you can't put it back in.
Uh-oh,
Um,
you became woke. You can't go back to sleep.
Right.
it's just like you can't unsee what you have seen. And so it's just like moving that progress forward. Joe, do you kind of feel like that too?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 1,000%. Like, yeah, you cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube once you get it out. Once you see, like, how can you stay quiet? You can't stay quiet because you look through history and you wonder, I've often wondered, throughout our history in America and throughout the things that have happened, particularly to the Black community in this country, how did other people stay quiet? How did they stay silent? How did they stand by and allow things to happen and not stand up and stop it? And you just, once you see what you see, you can't be silent anymore.
Well, I've got a great story to go along with that, about a white person who got involved, who saw and couldn't unsee. So I wrote in my first book, The Color of Compromise, about Charles Morgan Jr., who was a lawyer in Birmingham, and he was there at the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. He was in Birmingham, where those 4 little girls were killed. And the next day, he gives a speech to this group of all white businessmen, right? And he says to this group, "Who did it? Who threw that bomb?" And he said the answer should be, we all did it, because they failed to take action in time to prevent this act of racial terrorism. And they knew about it, but they didn't do anything about it. So he was demonstrating inadvertently the idea of compromise and complicity with racism. What I didn't say in that first book is what I pick up on the story in The Spirit of Justice. So what happened to Charles Morgan Jr. after he saw and couldn't unsee? He got ran out of town.
Right.
He gets death threats over the phone. Somebody calls him and says, "Is the mortician there yet?" He's like, "What mortician? What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, they will be when all the dead bodies are on your front lawn." He's like, "What?" And that was the first of many calls that somebody follows his wife and son on their daily errands and sends him a list of where they were and what time they were there to let him know they were tracking them. So he gets run out of town. One of the saddest parts of it, their son has to give away their pet dogs.
Oh.
You know how pets are members of the family.
Mhm.
Has to give
Yep.
them away, and they move north. But here's what happened: he couldn't unsee. He becomes a lawyer focused on civil rights. He ends up defending folks like Muhammad Ali when he refused the Vietnam draft. He ends up defending all kinds of Black activists when they get in trouble for their activism. And so inadvertently, the people who tried to shut him down and put the toothpaste back into the tube actually strengthened his resolve. And he was able to tap into that spirit of justice to have a long career as a civil rights lawyer.
Wow.
And that's why, I mean, I kinda talked about this too, but I just wanna, like, circle back a little bit to white Christian nationalism and
Hmm.
the threats that they're feeling, especially when white people stand up. Like, you think of, like, 2020, like, the murder of George Floyd, and you see these Black Lives Matter marches, and they're full of white people, young white people, white families, all of this, and that could be really scary because they're hold on, wait a second, like, that we're losing our power, so I'm just curious
Yeah.
your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Listen, the power of whiteness, which is an ideology. It is
Mhm,
really not about skin color or DNA. It's a belief system that you buy into, right? The power of whiteness is um, people walk in lockstep. They get into formation. And this is where white people can get in trouble for having racial solidarity is you break formation and you become a threat to the status quo.
mhm,
So they'll shut white people down just as fast as anyone else because they have broken ranks with this social agreement that
Hmm.
says if we all stick together and call ourselves white, we can create opportunities and privileges for ourselves and exclude others, right? But when you don't stick to that party line, that threatens the whole thing. So it is precarious. And one of the things that I talk about in the introduction to the spirit of justice is count the cost. A lot of people say, "Oh, I want to be, in solidarity. I want to do justice." Great. Understand the consequences. There's always blowback. There's always pushback. In history, people lost their jobs. They endured beatings. They endured lynchings. They endured ostracism. They had to leave their churches, their communities. What are you truly willing to do for the sake of justice? Because if it's just this virtue signaling that you want to appear righteous without any personal sacrifice, just be quiet.
yeah,
Just be quiet. We don't need that kind of support. What we need are people who are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with the marginalized and oppressed so close that, in fact, the ways that other people are wounded and hurt in this struggle, you might actually be wounded and hurt alongside them. But it is in that coming together that we find true community. I think a lot of us are searching for true friendship, true relationship, through connection, even in our faith community, and we feel disconnected. You want to
Mm.
know how a lot of people stay in the struggle for justice? It's the people they meet along the way. So when you get involved in this, I'm sure your friendship has developed between you. I'm sure in the entire group, you've come across people across the nation and the world who you feel like sisters with. You may have never even met in person. Why? Because you're about the same thing. You're about pursuing justice and the good and the right all together. And that's what binds and that's what connects. So I think for people who are struggling with a sense of disconnection, feeling excluded from communities they once called home, actually get on the journey of justice and you'll be surprised at who you meet along the way.
I love that, Jill, so much. And that's really where change happens too, because
Mm,
you have someone that's shoulder to shoulder you're with, that you count on, and that they count on you. And when you feel that connection to someone else, it's really personal. It's really personal. And so you fight. I feel like you fight harder and you accept a whole
that's
lot
right.
less. Yeah. I
Let
just
me
wanted
also get on
to
one
go
more
ahead.
soapbox here. I got
Yeah.
to say, the spirit of justice, part of it is about how do you get on and stay on this journey of justice. I think we need to change our calculus for justice. We need to change our calculus for justice. What I mean by that is oftentimes we evaluate the success of our efforts by the external changes in the world. Did the law get passed? Did this person get elected? Did this policy change? Those are important. But to stay in this struggle for justice, we have to expand the metrics. It can't just be about the changes that happen in the world, it has to be about the changes that happen in us.
Hmm.
So, in the final chapter of the book, I include these four virtues that I think are consistent across more than 50 different people I profile across 400 years of history. Those virtues are faith, courage, imagination, and resilience. And I go all into that, but the point is, when you pursue justice, it's not just about the changes you make in the world, it's about the changes that happen in you. You become a more virtuous person. You become a more courageous person. You become a more resilient person. And there is value and virtue in pursuing righteousness and justice just for its own sake, not because you get a guaranteed result, but because you change in the process. And who we are becoming matters just as much as the changes we're making in the world.
Look, I mean,
We're
right?
like, yes,
I could
yes.
listen to you say that all day long.
I know. But, like, because it's true,
Yeah,
and I
it's so
feel it, and I
true.
know Joe feels it, and,
Yeah.
both of us have children, and I feel like
Mm,
definitely, like, as being, like, a mom and as a parent, it's
yes,
they do say, like, the best way that you I don't know, can, like, influence, like, your children is to model the behavior, is to you know what I mean? And what you're saying, like, when you work on yourself, when it happens within you, then it kinda, like, spreads out around you.
It's true. And I feel that, like, Jill, we talk about this stuff all the time, but you also do have a companion piece to the book for kids 8 to 12, right? Did I see
yes,
that?
yes,
Yes.
That's
yes.
genius. That's so smart.
Uh,
I don't need to tell you how
so it's
smart that is.
actually a three-book deal. It's the Spirit of Justice, and the one that comes out September 3rd, that's the adult version. In January, we have a young readers version for young readers 8 to 12, and there's going to be my first picture book for
Ooh.
little ones. So
Oh,
all of those actually are available for pre-order now. But the young readers version is called Stories of the Spirit of Justice, and then the picture book is called The Spirit of Justice Speaks. Here's the fun part about the picture book. Uh, I'm not a children's book writer, so I had a co-author, and the publisher was like, "Who should we get? Do you know of anybody?" And actually, my best friend from childhood is a children's book writer, so we got to co-author that thing together. So
Oh
fun.
my gosh,
Oh,
that's so special. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Yeah, I'm glad you said so your books are ready for pre-order. The Spirit of Justice comes out a week from today, September 3rd. And then I also have to give a little plug for with Red, Wine, and Blue, we have a special podcast, 3-part series coming out next week. And Jemar is one of the guests on the podcast talking about white Christian nationalism. It's called Sacred Politics. So it'll be on our Suburban Women podcast feed and our Cost of Extremism podcast feed. And I know, Jamar, you did an event with us recently as well. I'm just like so happy you're part of the Red, Wine, and Blue family.
I'm all in.
Love
Whatever y'all
talking to
need
you.
from
Yeah,
me.
yeah, that's
Thank you so
amazing.
much for the work you're doing, especially in this moment. One of the things that historians talk about is contingency. And one of the ideas of contingency is that every situation is different and every situation can be different. It all depends on the choices people make. So nothing is inevitable. Slavery wasn't inevitable in this country in the 1500s and 1600s. It could have gone another way. But because people chose certain things, it went the way it did. Well, now we're in one of those moments where, depending on the choices people make and the actions people take, it can go one of two ways. We can head toward a white Christian nationalist, fascistic, authoritarian government, or we can head toward a participatory, multiracial democracy and try to fulfill the ideals of this nation. And nothing is inevitable. So don't resign yourself to the bad possibilities. Don't be relaxed and sanguine about the good possibilities, but work as hard as you can to gain your desired outcomes and tap into that spirit of justice to be in that long stream of people and inherit and carry forward that legacy of liberation.
That's it.
yeah.
That's the thing. Joe, I mean, I have no other questions. Do you have any other questions?
No, I feel like my cup was just like it
Yeah.
filled so high that it's
Aw.
spilling over. It just feels like these are those kinds of conversations where your hair stands up on end and you're
Yeah.
like, let's go. Where can I go
Mm,
right now? I want to do something
I
right
know.
now.
mm,
And I'm like, oh, we kind of are doing something right now, but it's like, yeah, I'm
you are.
so inspired right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining. This will save on our YouTube channel and definitely get the book for, everybody in your life, every age. We've got we've got one. I mean,
He's
Jamar's
covered.
got one. I don't have one, but he's got one for everybody in your family. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Honored by your time.
Thank you.